My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 70 years old, and at my own retirement party, my daughter-in-law tried to murder me for my inheritance. Before I tell you how I turned the tables and made her own mother drink the poison she prepared for me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Someone call 911. The shriek cut through the laughter and champagne-fueled chatter like a shard of glass. It was my daughter-in-law, Brittany. Her voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was raw with a panic that felt rehearsed. A performance worthy of an Oscar. The crystal flute slipped from her mother's hand, shattering on my marble kitchen floor. Margaret Peterson, Brittany's mother, was convulsing. A terrible jerking dance of limbs against the cold stone. A white foam was already collecting at the corners of her mouth. Guests gasped. Someone fumbled for a phone. My son, Kevin, rushed to Margaret's side, his face a mask of confusion and horror. And all I could think, watching this chaos unfold in my beautiful Oak Ridge home, was, well, that wasn't supposed to happen to her. Because the person lying on my floor, gasping for air, was supposed to be me. I knew exactly what was in that champagne glass. I knew because I was the one who made sure Margaret drank it. To understand why a 70-year-old grandmother, a woman who just sold her logistics company for a staggering $23 million, would do something so calculated, you need to see what I saw just 2 hours earlier. The party had been in full swing. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings of the house my late husband and I had built together. It was supposed to be the celebration of a lifetime, the official start of my golden years. After 45 years of grit and grind, building a company from nothing, I had finally earned my rest. My son Kevin had insisted on throwing this party. "Mom, you deserve it," he'd said, his earnest brown eyes looking at me with what I had mistaken for pride. "Let Brittany handle everything. You just relax." And oh, she handled it. Brittany, the woman who complained that the dishwasher was too complicated, was suddenly Martha Stewart incarnate. She'd been a whirlwind of activity all day, arranging flowers, polishing silver, her perfectly manicured nails flitting over every surface. She gushed about how much she loved me, how proud she was. It was all a little too much, a little too sweet, like honey laced with arsenic. I was making small talk with an old business partner, David, listening to him drone on about market trends, when a strange feeling made me glance across the room. It was a sixth sense I'd developed in the boardroom, an instinct for when a deal was about to go sour. My eyes drifted over to the champagne table, where dozens of glasses stood waiting for the celebratory toast. And that's when I saw her. Brittany. She was standing with her back mostly to the room, but I had a clear line of sight. She glanced over her shoulder, a quick, furtive movement. Then she reached into her ridiculously expensive designer handbag. My stomach tightened. She pulled out a small dark glass vial, the kind you'd use for eye drops. My blood ran cold. I couldn't hear what David was saying anymore. The sound in the room faded to a dull roar. All I could see was my daughter-in-law, her movements swift and practiced. She looked around one last time, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she was sure no one was watching, she zeroed in on one specific glass. The one with the tiny, almost invisible chip on the rim. My glass. The one I always used at parties so I wouldn't lose track of my drink. She knew that. She unscrewed the cap with a flick of her wrist. The room felt like it was closing in on me. This woman, who my son loved, who I had welcomed into my family, was about to poison me at my own party, in my own home, in front of everyone I knew. She tipped the vial, and I watched as 3 clear, oily drops disappeared into the golden bubbles of my champagne. And in that single silent moment, I knew this wasn't just about my money anymore. This was a declaration of war. A sensible person would have screamed. A rational person would have dropped their canopy, pointed a trembling finger and shouted, "She's trying to kill me." But 45 years of navigating corporate takeovers and gutting out recessions had taught me one thing. You never show your hand until you're holding all the cards. Panic is a luxury I could never afford. In that moment I thought of my late husband, Richard. I remembered standing by his hospital bed, his hand frail in mine, and promising him I would always be strong. Not just for myself but for the family we had built. I wasn't about to let his legacy, our legacy, be destroyed by the grasping hands of this greedy, soulless woman. So I smiled. I nodded at whatever David was saying, my eyes still locked on that doctored glass. The snake had revealed itself. Now I just had to let it think it had cornered the mouse. A few minutes later, Brittany picked up the tray. On it were 2 glasses of champagne. One for me, one for my business partner, David. But her eyes were only on the glass with the chip, my glass. She glided through the crowd, her smile a brilliant, predatory thing. She moved with a liquid grace that was both captivating and terrifying. She looked like the perfect daughter-in-law, a vision of elegance and concern. I knew better. I saw the viper hiding behind the lipstick. "Eleanor, you look tired," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she reached me. She handed the other glass to David before offering the poisoned one to me. "Here, have some champagne. You've more than earned it." Her fingers brushed mine as I took the glass. They were ice cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the crowded room. I met her gaze, and for a fraction of a second I saw it. Not concern, not love, just a cold, hard glint of anticipation, of greed. It was the look of someone about to cash in a winning lottery ticket. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice warm and steady, a testament to years of practice in high-stakes negotiations. "How thoughtful of you." I held the glass, letting the bubbles tickle my nose. I could almost feel the poison in it, a silent, waiting death. I mingled, laughed, and accepted congratulations, all while the instrument of my potential demise was held casually in my hand. It felt impossibly heavy. I was acutely aware of Brittany's eyes on me, watching from across the room, waiting for me to take that first fateful sip. Every time I raised the glass to my lips in a mock toast, I could feel her focus intensify. But I was waiting too, biding my time for the perfect moment. My opportunity came about 10 minutes later. A neighbor had cornered Brittany, gushing about the new diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist. It was a gaudy thing, something I knew they couldn't possibly afford on Kevin's flagging salary or her hobby business. As she was distracted, basking in the envy, I made my move. Her mother, Margaret, was standing near the French doors that led to the patio, looking a bit lost in the crowd. Margaret had always been a bit scattered, a sweet woman but easily flustered. She was holding a glass of sparkling water, looking vaguely uncomfortable. I drifted over to her, a warm, grandmotherly smile on my face. "Margaret, you look like you could use a top-up," I said, my voice light and conspiratorial. As I spoke, I gestured toward the garden. "Did you see the roses this year? Richard planted those bushes the year we moved in. They've never been better." It was the perfect misdirection. As she turned her head to glance outside, her face softening with the memory of my husband, my hands moved with a speed that would have surprised them all. In one fluid motion, I placed my poisoned champagne glass on the small table next to her purse and picked up her water glass. The clink of glass on wood was masked by the party's noise. The entire swap took less than 2 seconds. When she turned back, I was holding her water. "You know what?" I said, feigning a sudden change of mind. "I think I'll stick to water for a bit. You enjoy this." I gestured to the champagne glass now sitting beside her, looking as innocent as a prayer. "It's a special vintage I saved just for tonight." "Oh well, thank you, Eleanor," she said, a little surprised but pleased. She was a simple creature of habit. If a glass of champagne was in front of her, she would drink it. It was the polite thing to do. I walked away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the wheels of fate turning, the trap I had just reset beginning to snap shut. I moved to the other side of the room, positioning myself so I had a clear view. I saw Margaret pick up the glass. My glass. She took a small, delicate sip. Then another, larger one. She smiled faintly. Across the room, Brittany was still laughing, oblivious. She thought she was moments away from a $23 million victory. She had no idea she was about to become the architect of her own mother's agony. 5 minutes passed. I saw Margaret bring a hand to her forehead, looking confused. She took another sip of the champagne, then frowned, as if noticing a strange taste for the first time. She looked around, her eyes glassy. She set the glass down. And that's when her body began to betray her. Her knees buckled. A choked gasp escaped her lips. And that's when hell broke loose in my kitchen. The ride to Mercy General Hospital was a blur of sirens and Brittany's staged hysterics. She was clutching Kevin's arm, sobbing into his shoulder, but her eyes were dry. "I've closed deals with some of the most ruthless CEOs in the country. I know what real panic looks like. This wasn't it. This was a performance. I watched them in the car ahead of me, their silhouettes framed by the flashing red and blue lights, and I felt a chilling detachment. I insisted on driving myself, following the ambulance. "Mom, you should stay home and rest," Kevin had urged, his voice tight with an urgency that had nothing to do with concern for me. "We'll handle this. We'll call you as soon as we know anything." "Nonsense," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Margaret is practically family. She's here as my guest in my home. I'm coming." I saw the quick, frustrated glance he shot at Brittany over the roof of his car. "Keep the target at home while we figure out what went wrong with our little plan." Too late for that. In the sterile fluorescent-lit waiting room, their act continued. The air smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Brittany paced the linoleum floor, the frantic clicking of her designer heels a metronome counting down her agitation. She'd periodically collapse into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, burying her face in her hands. Kevin sat rigidly, his thumb scrolling endlessly through his phone. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. He wasn't worried. He was calculating. He was trying to figure out their next move, how to salvage their monstrous plan. Every so often, he'd look over at me, his expression a carefully crafted mask of concern. "Are you okay, Mom? This must be such a shock. Maybe I can get you some water." "I'm fine, dear," I said, patting his hand, my touch deliberately cool. "I'm just worried about poor Margaret." I stayed close enough to overhear the nurses at their station. "Acute poisoning 'cause unknown." The doctor mentioned something about plant alkaloids to a resident. Specific. Untraceable. Someone had done their homework. They hadn't planned for a simple accident. They had planned for an undetectable murder. That's when I decided to test the waters, to toss a small stone into their pool of deceit and watch the ripples. I walked over to Brittany as she was getting a cup of coffee from a vending machine, her hands trembling slightly as she fed the dollar bill into the slot. "You know," I began, my voice just a soft murmur as if sharing a secret. "It's all so strange. Margaret seemed perfectly fine just moments before." I paused, letting the silence hang. "It's lucky she didn't drink much of that champagne. She only had a few sips before she collapsed." Brittany's hand jerked, sloshing hot coffee onto the floor. It sizzled on the polished tile. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with a flicker of genuine fear before she expertly masked it with confusion. "Champagne?" she stammered, her voice a little too high, a little too sharp. You think the champagne caused this? Why would you say that?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said with a dismissive wave of my hand. "Just an old woman's mind looking for patterns where there aren't any. You know how we get. Don't you mind me?" But I had my answer. Her face had gone a shade paler than the cream-colored walls. Across the room, Kevin had stopped scrolling. He was watching our exchange with the intensity of a predator. He knew I just hit a nerve. He knew the word champagne was a loaded gun in this room, and I had just fired a warning shot. 3 hours later, a doctor told us Margaret was stable but would be kept overnight. The tests were inconclusive, he said. But whatever it was, it seems to be working its way out of her system. As we walked out to the parking lot, the cool night air did little to calm the tension. Kevin put his arm around my shoulder. "Mom, maybe you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate. How convenient. Get me back to their house, away from any evidence at my own home. Perhaps offer me a sedative to help me sleep. An elderly woman distraught over her friend's sudden illness, accidentally taking too many pills. It was a story that wrote itself. A perfect little epilogue to their failed poisoning plot. A neat and tidy funeral would surely follow. "That's sweet of you, dear," I said, turning to face him under the pale glow of a parking lot light. "But I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember? The one you said was overkill." I kissed his cheek, a gesture that felt as cold and foreign as a handshake with a stranger. I got into my car and started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I watched them. They didn't move. They stood frozen and then began the argument. It was urgent, whispered, and angry. Brittany was gesturing wildly toward the hospital, then toward me as I drove away. Kevin grabbed her arm. She ripped it away, her face a mask of fury. They thought they had failed. They thought their plan had gone horribly wrong. They had no idea that my plan was just getting started. Back home, the silence was deafening. The remnants of the party, a few forgotten glasses, a plate of untouched canapés, felt like artifacts from another life. The ghost of celebration haunted the rooms. I walked straight past it all and into my study. I poured myself a glass of champagne, from a fresh, unopened bottle of course, and sat down at my large oak desk. It was time for research. I didn't need a computer. I had my checkbook registers from the last 5 years and a memory as sharp as a diamond. For the next 3 hours, I laid out the financial ruin of my son and his wife. It was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a deliberate, sustained campaign of living a lie. Kevin's architectural firm, which I had helped him start with a generous loan he never repaid, was bleeding money. I knew this because I was still, foolishly, a silent partner. The quarterly reports I'd been ignoring painted a grim picture. He was losing clients and underbidding on projects just to keep the lights on. Brittany's boutique jewelry business was a joke, a vanity project that functioned more like a money pit. Yet they lived like royalty. The mortgage on their ridiculous McMansion in the nicest part of Oak Ridge was 3 times what they could reasonably afford. Their 2 luxury cars, a BMW and a Mercedes, were leased at exorbitant rates. I started totaling up the checks I had written them over the years. The paper records a testament to my own blindness. There was the down payment on the house, a gift after Brittany cried on the phone to me for an hour about wanting to start a family in the right neighborhood. A place with good schools for Emily's future college fund. There was the private school tuition itself, an annual expense that could have funded a small business. There were the countless loans for tight months that I knew would never be paid back. I remembered one call from Kevin, his voice strained, talking about a potential promotion for a key employee that he couldn't afford. I'd written the check without a second thought. The final tally was staggering. Nearly $250,000. I had called them gifts, investments in their happiness. But looking at the numbers now, under the harsh glare of my desk lamp, I saw them for what they were. They weren't gifts. They were installments. Advance payments on an inheritance they were just dying to collect. They hadn't been building a life. They had been treading water, waiting for me to die so they could finally have the lifestyle they felt they were entitled to. The phone rang at 7:30 the next morning. It was Brittany. Her voice was thick with a syrupy, fake concern that made my stomach turn. "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep all night thinking about you," she said. "After what happened to Mom, I just worried that maybe there was something wrong with the food or drinks. You didn't feel sick at all, did you? No headache? No dizziness? Just checking to see if the poison had a delayed reaction, dear." "Not at all," I said, my voice cheerful. "I feel wonderful. Have you heard anything more about your mother?" "Oh, the doctors say she should be able to go home today. They think she just had a bad reaction to one of her medications. You know how she is." It was a blatant lie. Margaret was meticulous about her health. She organized her vitamins in a pill case labeled with the days of the week. "That's such a relief," I said. "I was so worried it might have been something at the party. That would have been terrible." "Oh no, definitely not," Brittany said, a little too quickly. "The doctors were very clear it wasn't food poisoning. Just one of those things." She was shutting down any line of inquiry that might lead back to my house, back to the half-empty bottle of poisoned champagne still sitting on my counter. After we hung up, I stared at that bottle. I knew what I'd seen, but physical evidence would be useful later. Very useful. I carefully placed it in a box, ready for the day it would become Exhibit A. An hour later, my doorbell rang. It was Kevin. He was standing on my porch holding a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, and wearing an expression of dutiful, sonly concern. He kissed my cheek as he came inside, the gesture feeling hollow and profane. "Thought you might want some breakfast," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You probably didn't eat much yesterday." I watched him move around my kitchen, a space he'd known since he was a boy. He opened cupboards without asking, reached for the sugar bowl, his movements familiar and easy. But the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man who would stand by while his wife tried to murder his mother. He sat across from me at the breakfast table, the pastries arranged neatly on a plate between us. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked. "Oh, you know me," I said lightly. "Takes more than a little excitement to rattle these old bones." He picked at a Danish, shredding it with his fingers. "That's what I was afraid of." An odd thing to say. I sipped my coffee and waited. He was about to make his next move. Kevin leaned forward, his elbows on the table, a carefully rehearsed earnestness in his eyes. "The thing is, Mom, Brittany and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I just sold my company for a fortune and retired. I'd say my situation is quite excellent." "That's not what I mean," he said, ignoring my sarcasm. "You're 70 years old," he began, his voice laced with condescending concern. "Living alone in this big house, all that money from the sale." He gestured vaguely, as if the $23 million was a troublesome burden. "It just seems like a lot for one person to manage." There it was, the opening salvo of their next attack. If poison wouldn't work, perhaps pity and fear would. "I appreciate your concern, dear," I said, keeping my voice even. "But I've been managing my own affairs for quite a while now. I managed to build a company from the ground up, after all." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "I know, Mom, but that was different. Business is one thing, but daily life is another. Yesterday's accident with Margaret. What if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours?" The audacity was breathtaking. It felt like a punch to the gut. He was using their own failed murder attempt as an argument for why I needed their protection. It was a twisted, perverse logic that only a truly desperate man could concoct. "Michael," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "Margaret collapsed at a party with 30 witnesses. The paramedics were here in minutes. I'd hardly call that a cautionary tale about the dangers of living alone." "That's not what I meant," he said, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a teenager trying to explain a bad report card. "Look, we've been doing some research. There are some really wonderful communities for active seniors. Places where you'd have people around, activities, medical staff on site. The nursing home pitch. Of course. How thoughtful of them to have already been researching my future living arrangements." "Actually, yes," he said, pulling out his phone. He slid it across the table. On the screen was a glossy website for a place called Willow Creek Estates. Pictures of smiling, silver-haired seniors playing bridge and doing water aerobics filled the screen. Everyone looked peaceful and content, probably because they were heavily medicated and had signed away their life savings. "It's only 20 minutes from our house," Kevin continued, his sales pitch gaining momentum. "We could visit all the time. It's more like a resort than a retirement home." He started listing amenities, trying to dazzle me. "They even have financial advisors to help manage residents' portfolios. The only thing is," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "there's usually a long waiting list. But they have a premium suite that just opened up. Someone had to move out unexpectedly. If someone wanted to move in quickly, they'd need to pay the full entrance fee up front. It's significant, about $400,000. $400,000. A nice little chunk of my liquid assets, gone in an instant. And once I was safely tucked away in Willow Creek, surrounded by their hand-picked medical staff, who would have power of attorney over the remaining $22 million? Who would manage my custody and care? It was all so transparently evil. "I'll think about it," I said finally, needing him out of my house. The air felt thick with his lies. After he left, a wave of exhaustion hit me. The emotional toll of the last 24 hours was immense. I walked into the kitchen to make a cup of tea, to steady my nerves. And that's when I smelled it. Faint, but unmistakable. Gas. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't a strong smell, just a slight, cloying scent in the air. I rushed to the stove. The pilot lights were on, but one of the burner knobs was turned ever so slightly, just enough to let a slow, steady stream of natural gas seep into my kitchen. I hadn't used the stove this morning. I never left the knobs on. I was meticulous about things like that. Kevin, while I was getting the coffee, while he was arranging the pastries, his back was turned to me for a moment. He must have reached over and twisted it. It wasn't enough to be immediately obvious, not enough to cause an explosion right away. It was a subtle, Insidious act. If I hadn't noticed, if I'd gone out for the day, the house would have slowly filled with gas. A single spark from the refrigerator cycling on could have leveled the entire structure. Or worse, I could have simply been overcome by the fumes in my sleep. They could have called it a tragic accident. Poor Eleanor, they would say at the funeral. She was getting so forgetful in her old age. It would be the perfect justification for them to take over my estate. You have to believe me. My son, my own flesh and blood, had just tried to set the stage for my death for a second time in less than 24 hours. But if you think that was the lowest they would sink, you'd be wrong. What they had planned next was so much worse. I stood there, my hand over the stove knob, the smell of gas filling my nostrils, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my bones. This was no longer just about protecting my money. This was about survival. I immediately called my lawyer, Arthur Hayes. "Arthur," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "We have a serious problem, and I think they're trying to kill me again." Arthur Hayes had been my attorney for 20 years. He was a thin, precise man who wore perfectly tailored suits and never showed an ounce of unnecessary emotion. He guided me through my husband's death, the sale of my company, and now he was going to guide me through this. His office on the 15th floor overlooking downtown Oak Ridge was my sanctuary. Surrounded by law books and the faint smell of expensive leather, I told him everything. The poison, the hospital, the nursing home pitch, and finally the gas leak. I watched his face as I spoke. For the first time in 2 decades, I saw his professional mask crack. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a flicker of genuine shock and anger crossing his features. "They're not just greedy, Eleanor," he said, his voice grim. "They're escalating. This is no longer a matter of estate planning. It's a matter of personal safety. We need to move quickly and build a legal fortress around you so high and so thick they can never breach it." And that's exactly what we did. For the rest of the day, we were generals planning a war. The first step was to counter their inevitable claim that I was losing my mind. "They'll try to challenge your competency," Arthur warned. "They'll paint you as a confused old woman who can't manage her own affairs. The gas stove incident, which they created, will be their Exhibit A. We need to cut them off at the knees." That afternoon, he arranged an appointment with a renowned geriatric psychiatrist, a woman known for her thorough and unimpeachable evaluations. I spent 2 hours with her, answering questions, taking tests that measured everything from my memory to my executive function. The result was a comprehensive, multi-page report declaring me to be of exceptionally sound mind and possessing a cognitive function superior to most people half my age. That document became the first brick in my fortress. The second step was physical security. Arthur recommended a firm that specialized in protection for high-net-worth individuals. The next morning, a team of discreet technicians in an unmarked van descended on my house. They installed state-of-the-art cameras covering every angle, inside and out. They put motion sensors on every door and window. They gave me a small panic button on a chain to wear around my neck that could summon the police in under 3 minutes. I told the neighbors I was worried about package thieves. They nodded sympathetically. By evening, my home, the place I had felt so vulnerable just a day before, was more secure than Fort Knox. But the most important step, the cornerstone of my defense, was legal. Arthur worked tirelessly, drafting a new set of estate documents. We created an ironclad living trust, designed to be untouchable. My new will was a masterpiece of legal precision. I revised my son's inheritance dramatically. He would no longer receive the bulk of my estate. Instead, I established a small trust fund that would pay him a modest annual salary, enough to live on but not enough to fund his and Brittany's extravagant lifestyle. Arthur added a crucial clause. If he ever contested the will, or was found to be involved in any criminal activity against me, he would be automatically disinherited completely. As for Brittany, she got nothing. Not a penny. Not a single stick of furniture. I added a specific clause naming her and stating she was to be intentionally excluded for reasons known to my executor. We even discussed the remote possibility of a divorce, and made sure no assets could ever pass to her through Kevin. The bulk of my $23 million estate would now go to a foundation I established in my late husband's name, dedicated to funding research for the type of cancer that took him from me. It was what he would have wanted. The messenger delivered the finalized, notarized documents late that afternoon. Holding the thick stack of papers in my hand, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in days. Let them come for me now. My phone rang. It was Brittany, her voice like honey laced with poison. Eleanor. Just wanted to let you know. Mom's home from the hospital. She's doing much better. That's wonderful news, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I'll come visit her tomorrow. There was a slight pause. Oh, she's actually not up for visitors yet, Brittany said smoothly. The doctor said she needs complete rest. She's still a bit confused about what happened. It might be best to wait a few days. I'll let you know. The lie was so blatant, so transparent. They were isolating Margaret. They were keeping me away from the only other person who was in that room when the poison was poured. The only person who could corroborate my story. They were trying to control the narrative, to ensure her confusion became the official story. I hung up the phone, a cold fury settling in my gut. My fortress was built, but the enemy was holding a key witness hostage. I had to get to Margaret. I had to know what she remembered. For 2 days I was stonewalled. Every time I called Margaret's home, Brittany would answer, her voice a cheerful, impenetrable wall. The excuses were always the same. She's sleeping. The doctor just left and said no stimulation. She's having a bad day, very foggy. I knew it was all a lie. Brittany was acting as a gatekeeper, a prison guard in her own mother's home, ensuring Margaret's version of events never saw the light of day. I could picture her standing over her mother, feeding her a narrative of confusion and memory loss, slowly convincing Margaret that she was losing her mind. I couldn't risk a direct confrontation at their house. I couldn't let them know I was onto them. Not yet. My plan required them to think I was still the vulnerable, unsuspecting old woman they could manipulate. So I waited, but I was running out of time. With every passing hour, Brittany was cementing her control over Margaret. On the 3rd day, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I got in my car and drove to Margaret's quiet suburban street. I parked a block away watching her house. I just needed a window of opportunity. An hour went by. Then I saw it. Brittany's white Mercedes backed out of the driveway. She was probably heading to the mall to spend more of the money they didn't have. This was my chance. My heart pounded as I walked up the driveway. I rang the bell and after a long moment, the door opened a crack. It was Margaret. She looked pale, tired, and frightened. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Eleanor, she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if Brittany might magically reappear. You shouldn't be here. Brittany said you were unwell. That you were the one who was confused. I know what Brittany said. I interrupted gently. May I come in, Margaret? It's important. We need to talk, just the two of us. She hesitated for a second, a war of fear and curiosity on her face, then opened the door wider. Inside, her small, tidy house felt oppressive, like the air was thick with fear. She led me to the living room, her hands trembling. Brittany told me I had some kind of allergic reaction, she began, her voice barely above a whisper as she sat on the edge of her armchair. She said I'd been confused, that I was mixing up my medications. And do you take any medications, Margaret? I asked softly. She shook her head. Just a daily vitamin. Eleanor. She's been telling me I'm getting forgetful, that I'm imagining things. She even brought over some new supplements for me to take, to help with my memory. I haven't taken them. They scared me. I felt a chill run down my spine. They weren't just isolating her. They were trying to drug her. I'm not imagining things, Margaret continued, her voice gaining a bit of strength. I remember the party. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. What do you remember? Her eyes filled with tears. I remember the champagne tasting strange, bitter, almost metallic. And before that, I remember seeing Brittany by the drinks table. She was holding a small bottle, like an eyedropper bottle. She tried to hide it when she saw me looking. It was the confirmation I needed. The final piece. Sarah, she said, her voice breaking, I think my daughter tried to poison you. I looked this poor, terrified woman in the eyes. A woman who had been gaslighted and manipulated by her own child. She deserved the truth. Margaret, I said, my voice low and steady. I saw her put something in my champagne glass. When no one was looking, I switched our drinks. The color drained from her face. The full weight of what had happened crashed down on her. She tried to kill you, she whispered in horror. And I almost died instead. Yes, I said. We sat in silence, the terrible truth hanging in the air between us. Margaret was no longer just a victim. She was my ally. She told me how Brittany had been talking about my money for months, about how unfair it was that I had so much. She told me about the constant pressure, the mounting debts, the desperation in their voices. After I left her house, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. But my relief was short-lived. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, a chime sounded from my phone. A security alert. Motion detected at the east side perimeter. I grabbed my tablet, my hands shaking slightly, and pulled up the live camera feed. The image was grainy in the infrared, but there was no mistaking the figure lurking in the shadows by the side of my house. It was Kevin. He was crouched down by the main circuit breaker box, a flashlight held between his teeth. He had a pair of wire cutters in his hand. He was trying to disable my entire security system, to cut the power, to blind my cameras and silence my alarms. He was trying to leave me defenseless. I felt a surge of ice-cold fury. I pressed the intercom button on my tablet. My voice, amplified by the speaker outside, boomed into the silent night. Get away from my house, Kevin. He froze, caught in the act like a teenager stealing a car. He dropped the wire cutters and scrambled to his feet, shielding his eyes from the security light that had just flicked on. Mom! He stammered into the darkness. I was just checking on things. I was worried the storm might have loosened a wire. I was just making sure you were safe. The lie was so pathetic, so insulting. He thought I was a fool. I am perfectly safe, I said, my voice dripping with ice. And the police have been notified. They have a direct feed from these cameras. He didn't wait to see if I was bluffing. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness like the coward he was. They were getting more desperate, more reckless. The attempts on my life were becoming more direct. I knew then that I couldn't just play defense anymore. It was time to find out exactly what I was up against. It was time to hire Patricia Dolan. Patricia Dolan wasn't the kind of private investigator you see in the movies. She was a former forensic accountant in her late 60s with a mind like a steel trap and a network of contacts that ran deeper than the Grand Canyon. I'd used her firm once, years ago, during a hostile takeover attempt of my company. She had uncovered financial dirt on the opposing CEO that was so damning, he'd withdrawn his offer and left the country. If there was a financial skeleton in your closet, Patricia would not only find it, she'd find out who sold you the closet. Patricia, I said over the phone the next morning, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me from the night before. I need you to dig into my son's finances. Kevin Vance. And his wife Brittany. I want to know everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, loans, hidden assets, everything. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah, are you sure? She asked, her voice gentle. Sometimes family information can be uncomfortable. I'm long past uncomfortable, Patricia, I said. I'm at the point where I fear for my life. Give me whatever you find. Don't spare me any details. 48 hours, she said. Those 2 days were the longest of my life. I barely left the house, watching the security monitors like a hawk. I documented everything, the phone call from Brittany, Kevin's late-night visit to my circuit breaker. I was building a case, brick by painful brick. On Thursday morning, Patricia called. Sarah, she said, her voice all business. Are you sitting down? I sat. For the next 20 minutes, I listened in stunned silence as she laid bare the spectacular financial implosion of my son's life. It was a bonfire of debt and deceit. They're leveraged to the hilt, she said. The house has been refinanced 3 times. They have 2 mortgages plus a home equity line of credit that's maxed out. They have over $100,000 in credit card debt, spread across 12 different cards. How have they been making the payments? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They haven't, not really, Patricia explained. They've been using cash advances from one card to make the minimum payments on another. It's a classic spiral. They were probably weeks away from total collapse, from foreclosure and bankruptcy. But that wasn't the worst of it. Not even close. There's something else, Sarah, Patricia said, and I could hear the grim tone in her voice. 6 months ago, Brittany took out a life insurance policy on you. The room spun. I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. How is that possible? She claimed insurable interest as your daughter-in-law and primary caregiver, Patricia said. It's a loophole, but it's legal. She must have lied on the application, claiming she provided daily assistance to you. The policy is for $500,000. Brittany is the sole beneficiary. A life insurance policy. This wasn't a sudden, desperate act. This was a premeditated plot that had been in the works for half a year. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They had a financial incentive to make sure it happened sooner rather than later. My mind reeled. The party, the poison, the gas leak. It all snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. And then Patricia delivered the final, devastating blow. There's one more thing, she said. I found a recurring monthly payment from Kevin's business account. Small amounts, listed as consultation fees. They're going to a Dr. Richard Steinberg. Who is he? I asked. He's a geriatric psychiatrist, Patricia said. And Sarah, he has a reputation. A very specific one. He's the guy wealthy families hire when they want to have an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent. He's known for providing the right diagnosis for the right price. He's had his license suspended twice in other states. That was it. That was their entire monstrous plan laid bare. It was a three-pronged attack. Plan A. Poison me and collect the life insurance and the inheritance. Plan B. If I survived, scare me into the Willow Creek nursing home, get power of attorney, and bleed my accounts dry. Plan C. If I resisted, bring in their hired gun psychiatrist to have me legally stripped of my rights, my freedom, and my fortune. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was a comprehensive, meticulously planned campaign to erase me. For a moment I felt nothing but a cold, empty void. The son I had raised, the boy I had loved, had conspired to utterly destroy me. But the void quickly filled with something else. A white-hot, diamond-hard resolve. They had underestimated me. They saw a frail, 70-year-old woman. They were about to find out they had picked a fight with the CEO who had spent a lifetime crushing her competition. I thanked Patricia for her work. Then I took a deep breath, picked up the phone and dialed Kevin's number. I let my voice tremble, filled it with the fear and confusion they so desperately wanted to see. Kevin, I cried into the phone. Kevin, you were right. I can't live alone anymore. I was so scared last night. We need to talk about Willow Creek Estates. Please, son, I need your help. The bait was cast. Now it was time to see if the sharks would take it. The change in his voice was instantaneous. The hesitant, defensive tone he'd used when I caught him at the circuit breaker was gone, replaced by a smooth, reassuring warmth. It was the voice of a predator closing in on its prey. Of course, Mom, he said. Of course. We'll be right over. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything. An hour later, they were in my living room. They looked like a power couple arriving to close a major business deal. Kevin was in a crisp button-down shirt, and Brittany was wearing a tailored dress that probably cost more than my first car. They were radiating an aura of triumph. I played my part to perfection. I let my hands tremble. I kept dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. I told them I'd had a terrible night, that the security alert had frightened me, and that I finally realized I was just too old to handle the stress of living alone. I even embellished the story about the gas stove, pretending I just discovered it, and that I must have left it on myself. I'm just so forgetful lately, I lamented, looking from one to the other. You were right, Kevin. I need to be somewhere safe. They exchanged a look. It was a quick, almost imperceptible glance, but it was filled with so much smug satisfaction it made my skin crawl. She bought it. The old fool actually bought it. We're just glad you see that, Mom, Kevin said, patting my shoulder. This is for the best. Brittany immediately took charge, pulling a thick leather briefcase onto my coffee table. She opened it with a flourish. It was filled with documents. We took the liberty of getting all the necessary paperwork from Willow Creek, she said, her voice all business. This is the admission contract, and this is the financial disclosure form. They need a full accounting of your assets to calculate the monthly fees and to set up the transfer for the entrance fee. She spread the papers out like a general planning a battle. It was a complete financial invasion. They wanted access to everything: my bank accounts, my investment portfolio, the deeds to my properties. Then Kevin slid another document toward me. "And this is the power of attorney paperwork, Mom," he said, his tone casual, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "It's pretty standard. The facility requires it. It just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't." I picked up the document. I didn't need my lawyer, Arthur, to tell me what it was. It wasn't standard. It was a comprehensive, durable power of attorney that would give him immediate and absolute control over every penny I owned. With my signature on this paper, he could drain my accounts, sell my stocks, and liquidate my assets, and it would all be perfectly legal. "This seems very broad," I said, pretending to be confused by the legal jargon. "Are you sure I need to give you this much authority?" "It's just a precaution, Mom," Kevin said smoothly. "Honestly, at your age, it's better to have someone younger handling all that complicated financial stuff. It'll be one less thing for you to worry about." At my age. That phrase again. The convenient excuse for their theft. "And what if I change my mind about Willow Creek?" I asked, looking vulnerable. "Can this be revoked?" They exchanged another one of their quick, telling glances. "Well, technically yes," Brittany chimed in. "But the facility has very strict policies about residents who try to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. It's all very complicated." Of course it was. Once I was inside, they would lock the door and throw away the key. And their hired gun, Dr. Steinberg, would be waiting in the wings to ensure I was never deemed competent enough to leave. I gathered the papers, my hands feigning a slight tremor. "This is all so much to take in," I said, sighing. "I need to think about this overnight. It's a very big decision." Kevin's face fell. The mask of concern slipped, revealing a flash of raw impatience. "Mom, remember what they said. We need to submit everything by tomorrow morning if you want to secure that suite." "I understand," I said, patting the stack of papers. "I'll have an answer for you in the morning. I promise." After they left, I watched from my security monitor as they sat in their car in my driveway, having another one of their intense, whispered conversations. They were so close. They could taste the money. I picked up the phone and called Arthur. "Arthur," I said, my voice no longer trembling. It was cold and clear as steel. "Prepare the fake documents. The account with the single dollar in it. And then call your friend Detective Miller at the Oak Ridge PD. Tell him to be at my house tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock sharp. The party is about to begin." Friday morning arrived, gray and drizzling. A perfect backdrop for what I had planned. At exactly 9 o'clock they arrived. They were practically vibrating with anticipation. "Have you decided, Mom?" Kevin asked, foregoing any pretense of small talk. "I have," I said with a resigned sigh. I gestured to the coffee table where the stack of paperwork sat. At the very top was the durable power of attorney. "You're right. It's time." I watched as a wave of relief washed over Brittany's face. She actually beamed at me. "Oh, Eleanor, I am so glad," she said. "You're going to love it there." "I'm sure I will," I said. For the next hour, I sat with them as we went through the motions. I signed the fake admission contract for Willow Creek Estates. I filled out the fake financial disclosures. And then, the moment of truth. Kevin pushed the power of attorney document in front of me. I took my favorite fountain pen, the one my late husband gave me, and signed my name with a flourish. Kevin's hands actually trembled as he took the document from me. He folded it carefully and placed it in his briefcase as if it were the Declaration of Independence. He thought he was holding the keys to my kingdom. In reality, he was holding a worthless piece of paper that gave him power over a bank account containing exactly $1. Brittany was on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm initiating the wire transfer for the entrance fee now," she announced. "They need the confirmation today." "There's just one more thing," I said, my voice calm. "My lawyer, Arthur, needs me to sign one last tax document before any large transfers are official. He's actually on his way over now." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Kevin and Brittany exchanged a final, triumphant smile. The last little bit of paperwork and then $23 million would effectively be theirs. Kevin stood up to get the door, probably expecting to see my balding, mild-mannered lawyer. But it wasn't Arthur Hayes standing on my porch. It was two men, both tall and broad-shouldered, wearing grim expressions and official-looking jackets. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" the man in front asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm Detective Miller, Oak Ridge Police Department. This is Detective Chun. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your home earlier this week." Kevin froze in the doorway. Brittany's head snapped up from her laptop, her face a mask of confusion. "What kind of incident?" Kevin asked, his voice suddenly defensive. Detective Miller's gaze swept past him and landed on Brittany. "A suspected poisoning, sir. We understand there was a medical emergency here during a party on Saturday night." The color drained from Brittany's face. That was my mother," she stammered. "She had a bad reaction to her medication. The doctor said it was nothing serious." Detective Miller took a step into the room, his presence filling the space. He pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "Actually, that's not what the hospital reported to us. The toxicology screen on Mrs. Peterson came back this morning. It showed a concentrated amount of oleander extract in her system." He looked directly at Brittany. "That's not a medication, ma'am. It's a cardiac glycoside. A deadly poison." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. "We also," the detective continued, his voice a low, steady drone, "had the remaining champagne from that evening tested. The bottle that was opened for the party contained the same high concentration of oleander extract. Someone at this party deliberately poisoned that champagne." Kevin was staring at Brittany, his mouth slightly agape, an expression of dawning horror on his face. "Jess," he whispered. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," she shrieked, her voice shrill with genuine panic now. "This is insane. Why would I poison my own mother?" "That's a very good question," Detective Miller said calmly. "Especially since the champagne glass with the highest concentration of poison was the one with the small chip on the rim. The one originally intended for Mrs. Eleanor Vance here." Brittany looked like she might faint. She swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a chair for support. And then Detective Miller delivered the final blow. He pulled another document from his jacket. "It becomes a little less insane," he said, "when we also discover that you took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Mrs. Vance 6 months ago. That gives you a very clear financial motive for murder, wouldn't you say?" "This is a nightmare," Brittany whispered, shaking her head. "Eleanor, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them." I stood up from my chair. I looked at this woman, this monster who had smiled at me while planning my death, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty calm. "I can't do that, Brittany," I said, my voice clear and strong. "Because I saw you. I saw you put the poison in my champagne glass." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "And then," I finished, "I deliberately switched it with your mother's." Kevin's head snapped towards me, his face a mess of confusion and disbelief. You knew." But before I could answer, all hell broke loose as Detective Chun stepped forward. "Jessica Vance," he said, his voice flat and official, "you're under arrest for attempted murder." As they cuffed her, Brittany's eyes, filled with pure undiluted rage, locked onto mine. "You think you're so clever, you old witch. You have no idea what you've done." "Oh, I think I do," I said softly. They led her away, her shrieks echoing down the hallway. Kevin just stood there, frozen, staring at the empty space where his wife had been. He looked at the power of attorney papers scattered on the table, then at me. And I knew the final act of this tragedy was about to play out right here, in my living room. After the police car pulled away, taking Brittany with it, an oppressive silence fell over the room. Kevin sank onto the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. He stared at the floor, his hands dangling uselessly between his knees. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. He started muttering at first to himself, then to me. The pathetic, predictable excuses of a weak man caught in the wreckage of his own making. "I didn't know," he whispered, shaking his head. "I swear to God, Mom, I didn't know about the poison. She told me it was just a plan to scare you." "Scare me?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Yes. To make you realize you weren't safe living alone, he said, his voice rising with desperation. She said she was going to stage a break-in or something that would convince you to move to Willow Creek willingly. I never would have agreed to murder. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading, desperate for me to believe him, to absolve him. A part of me, the mother in me that I thought had died, felt a flicker of pity. But the CEO in me knew better. You never trust a cornered liar. Show me your phone, Kevin, I said. What? Your phone. Give it to me. He hesitated, a flash of fear in his eyes. Reluctantly, he pulled it from his pocket and handed it over. It took me less than a minute to find what I was looking for. The text messages between him and Brittany from the days leading up to the party. I read them aloud, my voice cutting through the silence. Kevin, did you talk to Mom about Willow Creek yet? Brittany, yes. She's considering it, but she's dragging her feet. Kevin, what if she says no? Brittany, she won't. Not after Saturday night. Kevin, what's happening Saturday night? Brittany, just trust me. By Sunday, she'll be begging us to take care of her. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table. It clattered against the wood. You knew, Kevin. Maybe you didn't know the specific ingredient, but you knew she was planning to harm me that night. You knew she was going to orchestrate some kind of accident to traumatize me into submission. He didn't have an answer. He just stared at the phone, his guilt laid bare. And what about Dr. Steinberg? Pressed on, my voice like ice. I slid Patricia's report across the table. My investigator found the payments, Kevin. You've been paying a psychiatrist for 3 months to build a case that I'm mentally incompetent. Was that also just part of a plan to scare me? He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Brittany said we needed a backup plan, he mumbled into his palms. In case you refused to sign the power of attorney. He agreed to evaluate you and find signs of dementia. It was just a precaution. A precaution? I said, my voice rising. You were planning to have me stripped of my human rights, declared a non-person, and locked away, and you call that a precaution? You were going to steal my money, my freedom, and my life's work, and it was just a backup plan. The truth hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. This was my son. The little boy I had held in my arms, the man I had sacrificed for, had plotted to systematically destroy me. He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, pathetic hope. The papers, he whispered. The power of attorney. I can rip it up. We can forget this ever happened. I almost laughed. Oh, Kevin, I said, a sad, bitter smile on my lips. Those papers you're so worried about? They're fake. Arthur prepared them for me yesterday. He stared at me, uncomprehending. The power of attorney I gave you, I explained slowly, as if to a child, gives you complete control over a bank account I opened on Wednesday. An account that contains exactly $1. The look on his face was something I will never forget. It was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and the slow dawning horror of a man realizing he has been completely and utterly outplayed. And the will you were so eager to execute? I continued, delivering the final killing blow. My real will, the one I signed this week, leaves you a modest annual income from a trust. Nothing more. And if you are convicted as a conspirator in Brittany's little plot, a morality clause voids even that. You will get nothing. His face crumpled. The last glimmer of hope died in his eyes. You've destroyed my life, he choked out. I stood over him, looking down at the ruins of the man my son had become. No, Kevin, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't take mine down with you. 3 months later I sat in my garden, the late spring sun warm on my face. The roses my husband had planted were in full, glorious bloom. The legal battles were over. The dust had settled. Brittany had been sentenced to 15 years in a state penitentiary for attempted murder. Faced with the evidence, including Margaret's testimony against her own daughter, she had taken a plea bargain. Kevin, in exchange for his full cooperation, received a 3-year sentence for conspiracy to commit fraud. His life of luxury was over, replaced by a small gray cell. Dr. Steinberg, the psychiatrist for hire, had his medical license revoked, and was facing multiple lawsuits from other families he had helped defraud. Justice, it turned out, was not just a concept, it was a tangible, satisfying reality. My life, which had been thrown into such chaos, had found a new, quieter rhythm. My granddaughter, Emily, now 16, had come to live with me. She was a smart, sensitive girl who was horrified by her parents' actions. We were navigating our shared grief and building a new kind of family, one based on honesty and trust, not greed and deception. The court had granted me temporary custody, and we were making it work. Margaret and I had become unlikely but inseparable friends. We met for coffee twice a week at a little cafe downtown. We were members of a club no one would ever want to join, the survivors of our own children's betrayal. She was thinking of writing a book about elder abuse, using our story as a cautionary tale. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me last week, stirring her latte. Seeing them both in prison? I considered the question. Did I regret losing my son? Every single day. I mourned the boy he used to be, the man he could have become. But he had made his choice. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. But I don't regret protecting myself. I don't regret surviving. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was Arthur, my lawyer, looking unusually pleased with himself. "Good news, Eleanor," he said, settling into a chair in my living room. He told me the insurance company had voided the policy Brittany had taken out on me, and Kevin's creditors were seizing all his assets, including the house I had helped them buy. "They're asking if you want to make an offer," he said. I thought of that house, with its cold granite countertops and cathedral ceilings built on a foundation of lies. "No," I said. "Let someone else have it. Someone who can afford it honestly." After he left, I poured a glass of iced tea and sat on my deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. I had learned a hard lesson at 70 years old. That money can bring out the absolute worst in people. But I had also learned that I was stronger than I ever knew. I was smart enough to see through their plans, tough enough to stop them, and resilient enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Grandma, got an A on my history final. Can we get pizza to celebrate?" I smiled, a genuine, uncomplicated smile. "Of course, sweetheart," I typed back. "I'm so proud of you." Maybe that was the real victory. Not the money I had protected, not the justice that had been served. It was this quiet moment of peace. This chance to ensure the next generation of my family would learn a different set of values. That love is not a transaction, and family is not a means to an end. This story started with a failed poisoning at my retirement party, but it's really about the difference between being old and being powerless. I may be 70, but I am far from powerless. And anyone who mistakes my wrinkles for weakness will learn, just as my son and his wife did, that underestimating a sharp old woman is a very, very expensive mistake. Thanks for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel it's important. Has anyone in your life ever made you feel small or tried to take advantage of you, just because of your age or situation? I'd be interested to read about your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories. Your voice matters.